Hello, my name is AJ Fox. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Director of Religious Education here at First UU. And today I wanted to share a story with you. It is a reinterpretation of a story, and it is in UU materials in a book called Moral Tales. So this story was recrafted with permission of the author Francis Doroff O'Priam of the Nortime community of Albuquerque, New Mexico, from his story, The Rabbi's Gift. This story is titled The Messiah Among You, and it goes like this. Mr. Cohen was the teacher of the most quarrelsome class you can imagine. The kids in that class argued about everything. They argued about who should stand in front of the lunch line. They argued about what games to play during recess. They argued about who was the best reader in the class. And if Mr. Cohen asked them whether it was sunny or rainy outside, they'd even argue about that. Mr. Cohen was at his wit's end. There was so much arguing going on that no one was learning anything. When they tried to do multiplication problems, Janie and Stan argued whether 2 times 2 was the same as 2 plus 2 or not. When it was time for spelling, Carmen and Ling began to quibble about who should get the first turn at the spelling bee. In music class, Carlos and Beth each tried to grab the tambourine, and Carlos ended up in the nurse's office when the tambourine hit him in the head. Mr. Cohen tried everything. He promised the class an ice cream party if they could just get through one day without an argument. No sooner had he made his offer than Charles and Bobby began to argue about whether they should get chocolate chip ice cream or cookie dough. Mr. Cohen threatened the kids. He told them he'd send anyone who was arguing to the principal's office. That didn't work either. The principal, Mrs. Sanchez, pulled Mr. Cohen aside at lunchtime and politely but firmly told him that 15 students in one morning was quite enough, thank you, and she hoped to be able to get some work done that afternoon. Mr. Cohen called parents. He tried very politely asking the kids to stop. He kept the class in at recess. Nothing worked. There was only one thing left to do. Mr. Cohen went to his synagogue on the Sabbath and he prayed. His rabbi noticed his look of despair and went to sit next to him. The rabbi listened to Mr. Cohen's tale of the most difficult, argumentative 3rd grade class in history. When she had heard it all, she simply said, "Stay home from work on Monday and leave it to me." That Monday, the kids walked into their classroom and found the rabbi sitting at Mr. Cohen's desk. Of course, they immediately began to argue about whether Mr. Cohen was sick or Mrs. Sanchez had finally gotten so tired of the steady stream of arguing children that they showed up at her office every day until they fired him. The rabbi sat and listened. She didn't yell. She didn't try to interrupt them. She didn't plead. She didn't scold. She simply sat quietly at Mr. Cohen's desk. After a while, the kids began to wonder what was up. The arguments gradually died down as the kids watched the rabbi to see what would happen next. When the classroom was finally quiet, the rabbi slowly stood up. "Mr. Cohen will not be here today. I am your substitute teacher, but I have only one thing to teach you. Listen carefully, for I will not repeat it." The kids were too surprised to argue. The rabbi's voice rang out in the stunned silence. "Last night, in my dreams, God told me that a Messiah is among you. Last night, in my dreams, God told me a Messiah is among you." What do you think happened next? Maybe they fought. Maybe there was more arguments. They argued, of course. Pandemonium, in fact, broke out in the classroom as the kids argued about who might be the Messiah. It couldn't be Charles. He was always getting into mischief. But on the other hand, Charles could always be counted on to help a friend or share his lunch. And Ling was clearly too bossy to be a Messiah. But then again, Ling went to church every single Sunday and prayed every night before bed. What about Janie? She always did her work so carefully and so neatly. The arguing didn't stop overnight. When Mr. Cohen returned to school on Tuesday morning, the first thing he heard was Stan's angry voice. "I'm telling you, Carmen, Bobby is the Messiah. Just the other day I saw him comforting the little first grader who had scraped his knee. Isn't that the sort of thing a Messiah would do?" Soon, however, the arguments began to disappear. When Janie began to argue with Charles that she should be the line leader, she suddenly offered to stand behind him in line. After all, Charles might be the Messiah. And in music class, Carlos and Beth took turns using the tambourine. After all, one of them might be the Messiah. All that year, the kids kept trying to figure out who might be the Messiah. They began to think about each other differently. They noticed all the good things about each other. Stan was a great artist with a huge imagination. Ling was a passionate and strong person. Carmen was the most loyal friend you could ask for. As for Mr. Cohen, he was a gentle, kind teacher. Maybe he was the Messiah. The kids also began to think of themselves differently. Each child wondered quietly, could I be the Messiah? The children were inspired to be the best people they could be. Soon the kids in Mr. Cohen's class had a reputation for treating each other well. Teachers came from far and wide to visit the class and asked Mr. Cohen for teaching tips. The year ended and the kids in Mr. Cohen's class graduated having learned a very important lesson they would never forget. Everyone around you is special, and anyone could be the Messiah. The next fall, Mr. Cohen looked at his brand new class of third graders. Already, John and Anna were arguing about whether or not alligators were the same as crocodiles. "Good morning, children," he began. "Has anyone ever heard of a Messiah?" He lowered his voice to a whisper, so everyone had to be quiet and listen, and he said, "I have been told that there is a Messiah in this class." The end.